Hey everybody, it's Paul from Alexandria Knife Sharpening and Laser Engraving, back with podcast number 2. So I quickly want to go over what we talked about in podcast number 1, just for some of those who may have not seen podcast number 1 or listened to podcast number 1, just so they know what the brief synopsis of the discussion was, or if you want to go back and listen to it because you just happened to find your way onto podcast number 2, but haven't heard number 1. So in podcast number 1, I talked about identifying the right markets for your potential sharpening business. And I talked about the importance of doing that as quickly as possible. In fact, I think that's one of the most important things is the sooner you can identify what your market is and who your market is, and going after that, the quicker your business is going to get established, get you moving in the right direction. And I talked a bit on that about how, for me, I quickly realized that it was a waste of time, all the traveling I was doing. So I had started out thinking I was going to do restaurants and kind of traveling to customers to pick up knives, bring them back, and sharpen them. I quickly realized that wasn't the most efficient. I found out, in a very short period of time, I had plenty of residential customers that were willing to come to me, that I wasn't even going to have to do that. Even though I started with one business model thinking I was going to be going to people and picking up knives and bringing them here, very fast transitioned into a drop-off service. That's an important thing that you need to focus on, I think, right away. What is it you want to have? But just know you might end up having to change it, or maybe you start doing something and you decide you don't like it. So, maybe you decide, I'm going to go to farmers markets and sharpen there, and you do your first farmers market and you hate it. Maybe you decide, like me, you want to do restaurants, and then you determine, maybe I don't want to do restaurants. Be flexible with your design of your business and what you're going to do, because there's a very good chance it might change considerably. It could be in a short period of time, or it could be in over a long period of time, depending on the amount of business you bring in and how things go. I touched on what I think is the smart way to enter the marketplace. We focused a lot on not undercutting your competition. Don't get in a race to the bottom on pricing, and having good relationships with other sharpening services or sharpeners in your area. And then we did talk a little bit about my other business, how I expanded into laser engraving and what goes on with that, and how I got into that. And now I kind of have two very functional businesses that complement each other, but either one of them could also be a completely standalone business all by itself. You don't have to do both. You could do one, you could do the other, or you could combine the two. They both are a good fit either way. All right, so let's now get into what I want to talk about in our second podcast here, which is having a business model that works, scaling it up without burning out. Let's talk about some time management. Let's talk about balancing sharpening and engraving, which is something I'm dealing with. We'll kind of cover that under just time management in general, and recognizing when your services are worth more money. I want to talk about that too. Like when should you be charging more? I would say majority of people that come to sharpening that I'm seeing and hearing from, mostly retiring soon or retired people that are looking for something to do to make a little extra income, or are younger folks looking for a side gig where they can make some extra money just to maybe have some extra cash coming in to the household. I would say that's definitely the core of the audience. As far as full-time sharpeners go, I don't feel like that's as big a group. Like people that are looking to start a 100% full-time sharpening service. Now, can you do that? Absolutely, you can. The majority of folks, I feel, are in those other two categories. Kind of a side hustle, or I'm retiring and I want something to do in retirement that I'm going to enjoy that might be fairly lucrative. And that's kind of the category that I'm in. But it's kind of funny because I was listening to my buddy Matt Rowell, who runs the Guild of Professional Sharpeners. And Matt just started doing a podcast, and he actually brought me up in his podcast. He kind of put me in a category of full-time sharpener, which is pretty interesting because I didn't start out with that intention. My intention was, I'm a retired police officer and I did want something to do to occupy my time. What I hadn't counted on was how well my business took off and the amount of business that was in my area. So I had an interesting, situation on my hands, which was that I didn't have to kill myself too much to get business. The business was out there. It was just letting them know that, hey, I'm available to do this. It was building the good reputation so that people would want to come to me. It was more of those things than it was, I know a lot of people, depending on where you're at, sometimes some people are struggling to get their first customers. So I will talk a lot about that too. We're going to touch on what are things you can do that I think work really well. What are some things that I think that are probably a waste of time? And we'll get into that a little bit. Kind of going back a little bit. So let's backtrack a little bit. And the first thing I want to talk to you is about time management. We mentioned we're going to touch on that. And that's an important thing. And when I started my sharpening service, one thing that was going on at the time, and I'm sure this had a lot to do with my success, was the fact that my wife happened to be on an overseas assignment when I very first started it. So she actually wasn't even here. She was over in Kuwait when I started the business, and she was there for about 7 months, and she had just left when I first started the business. My wife wasn't here. I was really able to hyper focus on starting my business. My availability was great. It was also during COVID, which we all know was a crazy time. But I start this business in the height of COVID. I have no spouse here to worry about because she's overseas. I'm not distracted by friends and people and going places because it was in the height of COVID and nobody wanted to be around anybody anyway, for the most part. I probably had kind of extremely accelerated start to my first year of business. What I did in that first 6 or 7 months, for some people, that might take 2 years to get that going. What I did in that short period of time. And then when you throw COVID in on top of it, with everybody being home, and it was also, everyone was home, and what were they doing? Well, everyone was home cooking and doing things like that. So there was a lot of really other factors that came into play that helped me become very successful fast. Now, what was the downside? Well, the downside was I found myself doing a full-time job when I wasn't really looking for a full-time job. I was looking for something to do in retirement. So I found myself in this, weird space that a lot of us just had never been in before. And I start this side hustle, and it very quickly took off. It did not take long before I had a significant amount of customers dropping off knives, which was nice because I was able to build it out very quickly. I was able to add more gear very quickly. I was able to focus almost 100% of my attention on sharpening. I didn't have many distractions that a lot of you will have no choice but to have, because some of you have kids, some of you have families, some of your spouses are here. I was able to not deal with that for the first 7 months. So that was definitely a bonus to getting this off the ground and going. So I just want to kind of mention that, because if it takes you longer to build it, don't be dismayed, because success doesn't come overnight, in a week, in 6 months. This may take you some time to build. You will also have an advantage if you're able to build it slow and over time. There's some advantages that come with that too, because you're able to really, give good thought into what areas you want to go into, what other things you want to do with the business, how you want to grow it, what you want to get into, without just having to deal with a ton of work coming in nonstop. and figuring out how you're going to manage all of it. Keep that in mind if you're in that category of retired, especially if you're retired. Now, also keep this in mind. I was a young retired guy, I was in law enforcement for 25 years. I had purchased my military time back. So I retired at a fairly young age of 47 years old. Not a lot of people are retiring at 47. So I kind of knew I had to do something else. So I also wasn't dismayed at what was supposed to be a retirement gig has turned into an 8-hour a day job. And quite often, and this is what, Matt will tell you this, it's sometimes way more than 8 hours. But here's the difference. I absolutely love what I'm doing. I love it. And there are days that I put in 12 hours in my shop working here. There are days that I put in a lot more time than I know other people would want to do. You certainly don't have to do those kind of hours. For me, that worked. And for me, it keeps me busy and kept me happy and lets me buy all kinds of cool toys and cool tools. And that's kind of how that worked. But just keep that in mind and recognize that your time management and how you want to spend your time, especially if you're in that retired category. And I would say, definitely think about it if you're older and retired. If I was 65 and just starting this, I don't think I would want to be putting in the hours. In fact, I can almost guarantee you when I'm 65, I won't be putting in the hours that I'm putting in now at 56. If you're not as busy as me, that could very well be a blessing. That could be something very good because you may not want to be as busy as I am. So keep that in mind as you scale your business, as you grow your business. Time is super important. We only have so much of it. And if you're going to spend 8, 10, 12 hours doing something, especially if it's in retirement, make sure it's something you love doing. I mean, you got to love doing it. If I didn't love doing this, if I didn't love sharing what I'm doing, if I didn't love making the YouTube videos, if I didn't love talking to my customers, this would be miserable. Like I do it because I love it. I think that's a huge thing. I think that's a huge point we shouldn't just skip over. All right. So just want to touch on that. And if it takes you time to build it, that's fine. As long as it's building, as long as it's growing, as long as you're working your way towards profitability and making a good reputation and all those things are coming into play, then I think you're doing great. And I wouldn't worry about, having to build it on light speed track. It doesn't have to go super fast. It can go slow and steady and get you to the same place. It just might take a little bit longer. Okay, let's touch a little bit on pricing. So last time I talked about not undercutting the competition. Don't get in a race to the bottom. Don't try and, if there's 3 or 4 other sharpeners in the area and they're all around the same price, don't go in and go drastically, undercut them thinking, oh, I'm going to get all the business because I'm going to be cheaper than everybody. For one, it doesn't work that way. And it's a terrible strategy. It gets you into a race to the bottom. What I want to just talk to you about today is recognizing what your services are worth. And that's a really difficult thing for some people. And I truly believe that many sharpeners undervalue the worth of what they're doing significantly. I don't know why that is, but I find that with really just about anything when it comes to pricing. And, and I've gone through that myself before too. So it's very easy to think like nobody will pay this for something. You start to realize that like maybe you're charging too low. Don't be afraid to raise your prices. Don't be afraid to bring them up. I just recently raised my base knife sharpening price to $13. And when I started out years ago, I started at $8 a knife. I very quickly ended up at 10. I mean, real fast. I would say within 2 months, I went from 8 to 10. I don't remember when I went to Then I started doing like 10 for Western knives and 12 for Japanese. And I just recently changed all my pricing again. So I went to $13 per knife. I also got away with a lot of what I thought was confusing. I had a lot of different options and things that people could pick from, like having their knife polished or cutting back bolsters or fixing chips and all these things, which basically I ended up doing almost anyway, because I never felt right if someone didn't put like, oh, remove the chips out of my knife, sharpening a knife and not removing the chips out of it. It just didn't make sense to me. So I decided that the very best thing was to have it as simple as possible. So I've always never had a measurement standard. You will see some people get into sharpening and they do it by, so much per inch. I never wanted that. I hate measuring. I didn't want my clients to measure. I didn't want to have to measure. I just had a fixed price. I've never looked back from starting my fixed pricing, and I've never regretted it. I like fixed price sharpening, and it has not hurt me one bit. Nobody has ever questioned it, even though a little paring knife that's this big is $13 and a big chef's knife that's this big is $13. If anyone ever asked, then I would have no problem explaining it. I've talked to customers about pricing before, but no one has ever asked, like, why are you charging this much for this and this much for that? But basically it kind of works out unless someone brings you exactly the same size of every knife, which can happen. If someone brought you, a dozen chef's knives, all 12 inches and bigger, maybe you would lose a little money or make a little less on if you had a measuring system. But in general, that's typically not what you see. You usually see a wide variety. But what I noticed, especially with residential customers, sometimes the smallest knife, the little paring knife, is just beat to hell. It's used in the house to open doors that someone locked. It's used to open mail. It's used to pry things. It's sometimes a screwdriver, and other times it's a paring knife. And I have spent more time sometimes fixing, removing chips, straightening a paring knife or a smaller utility knife than the big giant chef's knife. Because a lot of people that aren't professional chefs, some of them are a little leery of using the big giant knives, but they use the hell out of like the small knives and the medium-sized knives. I have mentioned that when people have asked it, but no one's ever really questioned it. It's not like anyone's ever been like, I can't believe you're charging me $13 for this paring knife. For me, that has not been an issue. That's how I price. Everything's a fixed price, and it kind of works its way out in the end. Testing and adding up things, I've found that it really does. In general, if you have a full set of knives, it's very close to the same price if you measured and did it by the inch, or if you just do a fixed price. So that's why I do the fixed pricing. But that's pretty much it about pricing. But just be aware, if you feel that you are undercharging, especially in the beginning, don't be afraid to bring your rates up some. You don't want to be not making a profit and sharpening people's knives and doing their work for nothing or very little that's not worth your time. Let's talk a little bit about tools. We'll just touch on it a little bit. This is more of the stuff that I get into in the regular videos, but it is something you want to think about so we can talk about it as a subject without kind of showing it. It is an important thing. And I think one of the things, if you start out, you guys have heard many times in my videos, I talk about you don't need a ton of gear to start out. You can start with one thing. You can start with a 1x30. You can start with, whatever it is you decide that you want to start with is fine. Just make sure it's going to work well for the amount of work you think you're going to get. And then I say, work with one piece of gear for a good bit of time. Master it. Don't go out and buy 25 different machines and master none, because that's not going to serve you well. Get a 1x30, sharpen a ton of things on it, learn to be fantastic on it, and then decide what do you want to get next. For me, And that would be my choice. If I was starting out right out of the gates, I would get one 1x30, and that's what I would start with. I would master it. I would modify it. I would make it exactly how I want it to be. I would start sharpening the heck out of kitchen knives and mostly that kind of stuff. I would start doing some EDC stuff. And then my second choice for me, and I'm talking my market here, scissors, and it would probably still be my second choice. And then I would look to, for me, I looked at a Taz machine or a twice as sharp machine. And then I quickly added a second one for me because I had one machine at first and I didn't want to have to change the stone out to do salon and barber shears. So I have one machine that's always been set up for salon and barber shears. And then I have my other Taz machine that has a 350 grit CBN wheel on it, which is what I sharpen most of my other scissors on. And then I would add from there. Now for me, my next machine probably would have been a Tormek at that time. Wasn't the order I went in. I went in a completely different order that didn't make sense. Then I would have probably added a Tormek. And then lastly, for me, I would have then added manual hand sharpeners like a TS Prof. And, you know, a lot of people go the total opposite. A lot of people start with a Wicked Edge or a TS Prof. And you can, but here's my opinion on starting with that. If you get, like I did, a lot of customers right away, you will find out very quickly that that machine is not fast enough for you. And it's not that you can't use it, because I've shown before, you can beautifully work them together. You could take a 1x30 and a Kubatron belt and take the chips out and do some reprofiling work on that, and then go to a TS Prof, something like, and put a really beautiful edge on a knife pretty quickly. Is it going to be as quick as working entirely on a 1x30? No. Is it going to be a really beautiful edge though if you go from a 1x30 to a TS Prof? Yeah, it can be. If you master the TS Prof, it is right up there with some of the finest sharpening gear out there. That's kind of the category I like to put my Tormek in too. If you master a Tormek machine, you are talking bevels that look beautiful, that look factory. There's just nothing like those two out there. You know, yes, 1x30s, 2x42s can do a beautiful job sharpening. Then there's like kind of next level stuff, which is where I then put your Tormek machines and your TS Prof sharpeners. And it's just really precision, really beautiful work. Now, why do I like having those multiple machines? Well, because not everything needs that incredible level of precision and beauty. You know, if it's a typical Henkel's kitchen knife, it doesn't need to be sharpened on a Tormek or a TS Prof. It can very easily go to a 1x30. Now, and that said, you know, that doesn't mean that you can't do a really nice knife either on a 1x30. You can. It's just nice to have other options as you grow. I would say, you know, when you're adding gear, add them slowly, really give some thought to what you want to go after, and also think about how it's going to affect your business too. Because there are some things that I sharpen and do that are time consuming. Okay. I do gardening gear. I do them very different than Cliff Curry does. Cliff is really fast when it comes to his gardening gear and stuff. I completely go about them different. I get a lot of like very nice Felco pruners and things here that I've mentioned before. The headquarters for the National Agricultural Society, and we have the across the river in DC. There's the Arboretum or whatever's over there. There's a lot of people that work in these places that don't live far from me. There's a lot of people that volunteer at them, and they come in with these really nice pruners and things. So I get a lot of that stuff. You know, I get some junky gardening gear too, but I just have a different way that I go about them. I take them apart. I clean them. I de-rust them. I sharpen them. and I try and give them back to just about everybody in really amazing condition. And my whole business structure is kind of that way. It doesn't mean you have to do that, but I also charge more probably than most people do for a pair of Felco pruners that might just sharpen them. You go to a farmer's market and ask to get your pruners sharpened, it's probably only going to be a couple bucks, but he's going to take them and he's going to zip, zip, zip through on a belt sander and give them back to you, and you're done. He's not doing like taking them apart, de-rusting them, sharpening them with exactly the precision angle that it's supposed to have on there. I do mine mostly on the Taz machine. Sometimes I do them on the Tormek, reassembling them, fine-tuning them, making sure it's working perfectly. If parts break on them, I usually reach out to them and say, hey, it needs this, it needs that. I carry springs, I carry all kinds of parts for that stuff, and I, rebuild it and give it back to them in pretty much pristine condition. It's just different than what a lot of other people do. And that's, my point is, you don't have to be like everybody else. You don't have to do pruners and hedgers and gardening gear the way that I do, but you also don't have to do it at all. And that's my other point. Be careful what you do take on, okay? So one of the reasons I charge more is because in the amount of time it takes me to take pruners apart and do all that, I probably could have sharpened 3 knives at $13 a pop. So, gardening gear for me, it's not as good of moneymaker as knife sharpening. If you have enough work coming in, you could be like, I ain't doing gardening gear at all. It also takes up space in your shop and in the spring, and it's messy. And, sometimes some people bring the stuff in and they haven't even cleaned the grass off of it. Just what happens. And other people bring the stuff in, it's in pristine condition. You will see a little bit of everything if you're going to do gardening gear. Now, I will say this. One of the reasons I do gardening gear is because every person that's ever come in with just gardening gear has come back at some point with knives to be sharpened. So there are things I do that may not be the greatest money maker, but it's going to bring other work in. And that's why I do the gardening gear. Okay. I do lawnmower blades. I hate them. I won't even do them in this new shop anymore. I do them in my shed because they're just messy. And I absolutely hate doing them. But those clients always come back with other work. Sometimes it's not even knives, but I've had people that have come in to get stuff sharpened and then realize that I do laser engraving, and next thing you know, they're in here with 10 tumblers to be engraved or a plaque for work for somebody. Some things you can think about too as adding to your service, and that service might bring in even more business. Okay. It doesn't necessarily have to be profitable right away. And there might even be some things that you will do that maybe won't even be profitable for a long period of time, but it brings in other work that will create the profit to make up for that item. Let's dive into a little bit on how to attract and retain customers. We'll talk a little bit about advertising. I know some people really want me to go into some of this about like how to get work, how you get your work in. So in the very beginning, I did do a little bit of very localized advertising. One of the things I did was next door. It was relatively inexpensive. I was able to do a 9-mile radius around my house. So the advertisement only went out to people within 9 miles. I was even able to pick the zip codes, if I remember correctly. Like, I want to be in this zip code. And I was able to pick like all these different zip codes. I didn't want anything on the other side of the river at that time. I was just looking for very local business. I don't know what it costs now because I haven't done any paid advertising in years, but I think I spent like $25 or $30 for a month. Like that ad ran for a month to all those people in that area. And I was able to track it. The first time I did it, I got like 13, 14 customers came in from there. The first 1.5 customers easily paid for the ad. Was it worth it? Yeah, it was. at that time, it was worth it for me to do. Now, eventually, my Google listing, which is still today, my Google business listing is my number one form of advertising. It is what brings me the absolute most customers in, other than like word of mouth. And it's the only advertising type of thing that I think generates a good bit of customers, because a lot of people use Google to search on. And when you search knife sharpening in my area, I come up first. And that is one of the main reasons I have the clients that I do. And I would say very much have a Google business listing, focus on it, comment, go after reviews, try and get people to review you, try and get those 5-star reviews. It will usually reward you quite well. Now, I haven't looked at it a while, but I know I have over 250 5-star reviews. I have no 1-star reviews, no 2 stars, no 3 stars, and no 4 stars. I have never gotten less than a 5-star review. Now, will the day come that someone gives me less than a 5-star? Maybe. I don't know. It has not happened. I hope it never happens. But if it did, I would roll with it, and I would, do whatever I had to do, and, go back, take a look, see if there was something I messed up, if there was something I could have done better. A lot of times, guys will write me and send me things like, Paul, do you think I should go to Costco and put 1,000 flyers out in the parking lot? Or should I stick, a business card on a couple 100 cars here and there? And should I hang things up in the supermarket? And I don't think those are bad ideas, but my experience has been that they just don't work that well. They don't work that well. You're going to put, 150 flyers out, and maybe you get 1 or 2 people. I don't know if that's, was it worth it, the time that you had to go out there and put things out on cars and things like that? I have found the best thing was word of mouth, talking to people just about what you do. I do love the only thing I ever paid for was Nextdoor. That was it. What I love more is finding a local resource that's going to bring you clients. One of the very best things that ever brought me people was 2 local cooking bloggers that wrote blogs on my service, and an article in a thing called Patch, which is also kind of similar to Nextdoor. It's like a local news thing. I don't know if it's throughout the country. It very well might be. Patch was doing pieces on new businesses, and I submitted to there, and the reporter interviewed me, and that article in the Patch brought me a whole bunch of new customers. The other 2 were 2 local food bloggers. One was a lady that owned a cooking store for years in Alexandria. She had about 5,000 followers on her blog, which I guess, in the blogging world, some people might be like, oh, that's not that many, but they were 5,000 local followers that learned cooking from her. And man, she did an article about me sharpening her knives, and it put me on the map. The day that article published, I had 17 customers show up at my house for knife sharpening. It was the most people at that point that I had ever gotten in one day. And it was like a Tuesday. This wasn't a Friday, a Saturday or something. It was like a really odd day in the middle of the summer. And this was way back also during, I think COVID was still going on. I actually ran out of things to put all the jobs into. But that's what I would go after. So I would say, before I would go paper a Costco parking lot with things in people's windshields, because quite honestly, I whenever I think of advertising like that, I try and think about like, what's my reaction when I walk out of Costco and there's a flyer on my windshield, and especially I have a Ram 1500, and half the time I can't reach it because I'm 5'8", and I'm like, all I am now is pissed off. I usually don't even look at it. I crumple it up, maybe throw it in the back of my truck. So the odds of I know for me, that's not working for me. I'm not hiring somebody because they put something in my window at Costco supermarket. I will say on my local supermarket, we have a little thing called a Safeway up here. It's a little tiny supermarket. They have a billboard. I have put my business cards up there, and that brought me customers. If you have places where you can put business cards, so putting a professional looking business card for knife sharpening and tool sharpening, that worked better for me than putting flyers out. I'm not big on the flyer thing. I wouldn't waste your time or money on that. But I do like the business cards on billboards, and I really like going after already established local businesses. So my other recommendation there would be look to see if someone does have a food blog, in your area. And that would be the person, if you're going to do something or give something away for free, that would be the person that I would offer to sharpen their knives for free. Hey, why don't you bring 10 of your knives into me? Let me sharpen them for you. And if you like what I did, maybe you could write a blog post about me. That's what I would do. Okay. That would be my advice to how to really grow fast in your local area. Look for those things. The other one that has always worked really well for me, and I've talked about it many times, I'll just bring it up quickly. There's a local hardware store about a mile from my house here. They're also a Wusthof dealer, and they recommend me all the time because they don't do any sharpening. So when people come in there with gardening gear, knives, anything they want sharpened, they give them my business card, and I make sure they have them. So I stop in every so often. Hey, do you guys need any new cards? I even put directions on the back from their store to my shop for them. So they get their own special business card. It's not my regular business card that I give out to everybody. Theirs actually has directions from Village Hardware to my shop that they can hand out to their customers. Make it nice and easy for everybody, So if you're going to be able to have a great relationship like that with a local business that's going to be willing to recommend you, make it easy, make it worth their time. Now, I also try and reciprocate for them when people are looking for knives. I don't sell knives here. I send them there. If they're looking for gifts, I send them there. And it also works for my laser engraving because they are a Yeti dealer and I engrave Yetis. And I've told them that. I've shown them samples of it. And if they need, if someone comes in and wants something laser engraved, which they do not do in their shop, they will send them to me also. So I've also gotten laser engraving jobs from that relationship with that local business. All righty. So we're probably well into 30 minutes here. All right. So before we change this and go on to another topic, because I really like this topic, but I also want to talk about, let's even talk a little bit about upselling, because we are marketing ourselves and we're marketing our services. So one thing that I do here that I don't know that every sharpener gets to do, depending on your circumstances, I do get to talk to a lot of my customers. In fact, it's something I really enjoy. And I also think it has a lot to do with my good reviews, because I will talk to a customer. If they come in, if they want to hang out for 5 or 10 minutes and have a conversation, I talk to my customers all the time about anything. I have had some that come in and hang out for a half hour. I've had some that have come in and hung out for an hour, but that's just something I enjoy. I'm retired. I've mentioned this before. I was a cop. When you're a cop, you talk to tons of people, you know a lot of people, but you're not usually seeing them at their best times. It is enjoyable for me to meet people, talk to people, just kind of build that bit of a relationship with them too, just by talking to them, being friendly, finding out about them, finding out what they do, finding out where they work. I also think especially if you're in the beginning, if you got your first customer came in, here's just an idea that I'll give you. If your first customer came in and you want to get a couple more customers, make sure they don't leave there with anything less than at least 2 business cards of yours, and maybe get a little stamp made, or, if you had a laser engraver, you could do this really cool, but don't jump into that too soon. But what you could do is you could make a special business card that gave a discount to a referred customer and let that person go out and say, hey, they get home. Wow, this was awesome. Hey, I got my knife sharpened by this guy. He lives down the road. He's really great. And oh, I need to get my knife sharpened. Oh, yeah. Hey, he gave me this card. And guess what? You get like 10% off. Or you get one, if you get 5 knives sharpened, he does one for free if you bring this card in. I would do something like that. So, yes, it might be tough to get that very first customer, but once you got them, do everything you can to get them to refer you to 2 people, 3 people, 100 people, whatever it is. Don't just send them back out with their knives. Send them back out with a couple business cards. Even if you don't get a chance to talk to them, put them in their packaging. Get them in there. Let me show you. Even though this is the podcast, it's going to be videoed here. I'm constantly making business cards for things. I got different colors. Here's some gold ones, metallic ones. Here's my black ones, which are my absolute favorite, black laser engraved ones. I have these really cool wood ones, so you can easily make something like this, and you could just, get a regular, if, I'm not saying go out and get a laser engraver so you can make business cards. But I'm just, what I am saying is get business cards. Go out and get them, get some business cards. And then, even if you handwrite it, 10% off, whatever the deal is, you can, write it on the back of the card that you give somebody. I think the more impressive you can make it, the cooler it looks and the better reaction you're probably going to get from it. But these are just, ideas and options and things that work. And I know the business card things work. And I know they work when you give them to other small businesses too. The other place, my barber shop, they have a supply of my business cards. I have had people come in there and then, they've come here and say, hey, Al or Dave up at the barber shop gave me your business card, or, the Village Hardware gave me your business card. So the other nice thing about having different ones or having specific ones for places you give out locally is you also have a way of tracking some of it. You see when if they bring it in, sometimes they just mention it. Sometimes they're not bringing it in. But if there's a discount on it, they're probably going to bring it in and give it to you. Just a thought. But that's one thing I would do. I wouldn't let anyone walk out without having some sort of something in there to try and generate some more work, especially in the beginning. The other easy upsell, this is just for those of you that have been around for a bit. I know a lot of guys are getting into laser engraving. Several of you I know have added them to add to your sharpening service. Offer it. If someone comes in and they're a chef, hey, would you like your initials put on your knife? Would you like something cool put on your knife? Have some examples around to be able to show people. It's been doing the name, or, a lot of my chefs get Chef whatever, Dimitri, Chef Marielle, Chef whatever, Chef Taylor, put on their knife. I don't think I've ever had one of my chefs say no. I think every single chef that I have mentioned, shown laser engraving to, has said, yep, I want that done to my knife. And most of them come back and have it put on their other knives or as they add new knives. So that's a very easy upsell. And it's also a great thing during like gift time or for someone who really likes cooking, and even memorializing stuff. I've shown that before too, where, people come in, and that can be an easy upsell to a regular customer. And that's how I've gotten some of that work. Sometimes you'll see someone come in and there's some new knives, and then there's, 1 or 2 other things. And then there's like this really old looking knife. Me, since I'm a chatterbox and I like to talk to people, and I'll be like, hey, what's up with this? Oh, that was my mother's knife. That was my grandmother's knife. That was my great grandmother's knife. Oh, wow, that's really cool. Ever think of getting it laser engraved? what? Yeah, you ever think of getting it laser engraved? Like, we could put your grandmother's name on. Do you have kids? Do you want them to know that this was great grandmom's knife? Like, we could put her name, date of birth, something cool on there. Very easy upsell. Has happened many times in my shop that I've done that for people. They're like, oh yeah, that's an awesome idea, and then that, it also, what I love about that is it kind of preserves that pretty cool piece of history for that family. Like, someone could pass away and not realize that mom had grandmom's knife in the drawer. Mom might have known that was her mother's knife, but are the grandkids going to know who that belonged to, or that was, grandma's favorite knife? So that's one thing that I've always loved with doing, like, the laser engraving like that of knives and family pieces, because it just kind of, lets everybody know that, like, hey, this is who it belonged to. Great way to remember that person with something that was personal to them, that they loved. And that's one thing that one of the many things I love about laser engraving, but personalizing stuff is just fun to me. And I always love to hear those stories. That's one thing that I've always enjoyed hearing: history, family history, other people's family history. And so that's just, that's that one for there. All right. And I wanted to get into one other thing. So I wanted to do something fun, and especially because I know a lot of you are former law enforcement, some of you are current law enforcement, lots of you are military, some of you are both. I don't want it to always be, oh, we can't talk about anything but knife sharpening. What I want to talk about now, and I won't drag it out for too long, and I'm going to put some links in this podcast and video for everybody, but I want to talk about what I'm listening to and entertaining myself with in my shop while I work. And I want to hear what you guys are listening to too, but I want to share what I've currently been absolutely intrigued with, because it's a subject that I've always been interested in since I was little, and there's just so much stuff going on right now, and I really want to hear some other people's opinions, especially law enforcement and military, on what you guys think of some of these things that are going on. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about some podcasts that I'm listening to. So when I work, I like to listen to podcasts. I've mentioned before, I like Sean Ryan's podcast, Joe Rogan's podcast, a lot of the normal ones, but there's some other ones that I've been listening to lately. And one of the ones, I was watching Sean Ryan, and he had some people on in the UFO area, and he had Dr. Greer on. And I've always liked Dr. Greer. I don't know if you're not familiar with him. He's been in the UFO community for years, trying to get the government to come clean on what they know, and get whistleblowers to come out and that kind of stuff. And not long ago, I'm going to say maybe 2 months ago, he said, there's some big stuff that's coming out soon. There's some whistleblowers that are coming out. This whole UFO thing is going to be blown wide open over the next year, but we got some really important things coming out. There have been some podcasts this week that, in my opinion, are absolutely mind-blowing. So I have been interested in UFOs, like I said, since I was a little kid, but I really got intrigued with them even more so. I've always watched, all the History Channel shows, and Giorgio Tsoukalakis. I love all his stuff. Recently, when they released the Nimitz video, that's called the Gimbal video, and I was on the USS Nimitz. That was one of my ships, so that really intrigued me when all this UFO stuff came out with my old ship, the F-18 fighters, and they showed all these different videos. It just started a floodgates of disclosure stuff coming out. But this week, a guy named Jake Barber, I think I have his name right, I will double check, came out. And this is absolutely one of the coolest most interesting interviews I have ever seen on the topic of UFOs, UAPs, all the different terminology we want to call them. And I want you guys to watch it. For sure, definitely make sure you watch this one. And I want your opinion, what you think. Do you think he's full of crap? Do you think he's telling the truth? Let me know. Let me know in the comments if you take the time to watch it, and you'll probably get hooked. And trust me, you might be wrapped into watching, 9, 10, 12, 15 hours of podcasts. The other ones, I think its name's Michael Herrera, who is a Marine. And they're kind of tied together in a way. So there's been a couple people. So Sean Ryan had a few people on, but this Jake Barber interview, you gotta watch it. And especially if you've seen any of that other stuff, make sure you don't miss his interview, and then tell me what you think. I will tell you my opinion, and I've watched multiple interviews with him. I kind of feel, as a law enforcement officer and someone who did that for a long time and did a lot of interviews, went to interview and interrogation school before, I feel like I have a pretty good lie detector for people telling BS. And I think I have a really good lie detector for when people tell BS stories, military stuff, sometimes immediately. And a lot of you military folks out there and veterans probably get the same thing. You're like, this guy's full of it. And if you really want to laugh sometime, there's a Navy SEAL who outs fake Navy SEALs. I mean, that's all he does. He does it full time. Don Shipley. I never realized there were so many people running around pretending to be Navy SEALs that weren't Navy SEALs. But he literally full time exposes these fake Navy SEALs. My point being that all my years in law enforcement, I feel I have a pretty good detection system for BS. I don't feel like this guy's lying even a little bit. I really think he's telling the truth. Man, if he is, the ramifications are just amazing. So I'll just leave it at that. I'll put the links in for what I think you should watch. I'll share some of these things with you. For those of you that decide to go check them out, give me your feedback. Tell me what you think. Maybe we'll even do an open call discussion on it sometime. But I think it's very entertaining. So I have very much enjoyed listening this week to numerous podcasts about UFOs, UAPs, drones flying over military bases and all this stuff. But the one I heard today, which is the second time I've listened to Jake Barber speak, was just really eye-opening. And I think you'll get a lot of enjoyment out of it, even if it's just nothing but entertainment, even if you think he's completely full of crap. I don't. I think he is the beginning of what we are going to see: a lot of disclosure, guys coming out of dark programs, maybe starting to hear some of the truth about what our government knows about the possibility of other intelligence out there on our planet. But let me know what you think, and we'll go from there. So that's it. I'm going to end this, wrap this up. But yeah, I just wanted to add that one little last thing in for entertainment and fun. And like I said, we don't always have to talk about knife sharpening and businesses all the time, nonstop, 24/7. We can occasionally throw something else in there for entertainment value. I will leave the links to few videos, podcasts, but most of them are podcast videos, so you can watch them and see. And let me know what you think. I'm really curious to hear some, especially my veterans and law enforcement people. But you don't have to be. It doesn't matter if you're one of neither. If you're not veteran or law enforcement or military, or I don't care what you are. Even if you're just a housewife that's on my channel learning how to sharpen her knives, and you got an opinion, I want to hear your opinion on it. Let me know what you think. And that's it. So I'm going to wrap this up. Thanks for checking out podcast number 2. I hope you got some value out of it. And I am still planning on doing something about trying to help people find content on YouTube. I'm still trying to decide exactly how I want to present that, but I do get a lot of questions asking about videos that already exist. And I didn't get a big response from any of you out there that given me any ideas how to do it. So I think I might just do a video. Here's what a channel is, because I'm just amazed that some people don't realize that, like, hey, this guy, Paul, who sharpens, who has alxsharpen.com, and who that's his channel on YouTube, has over 300 videos, and they all live on that channel. Like, there are people that just don't get that are searching all of YouTube and then trying to find me and are missing so much of the content that I've done. And that's disturbing too, when you put all this work into creating content and people can't find it. That can make you a little nuts too. So it's like, why are they not finding what I did? That's it. Have a great night, everybody. I will talk to you soon. Got some editing to do here. I'll try and cut this down, make it enjoyable for everyone. And thanks for checking out podcast number 2 of The Sharp Life. I will talk to you soon.